Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the monthly business briefing from the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry and the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. I'm David Taylor from PMA. Co-hosting with me is Luke Bernstein from the PA Chamber. And before we introduce today's guest, if we could please just go around the room and if folks could introduce themselves. And because we have the benefit of coverage here from the Pennsylvania Cable Network, please be sure that the green light is on and that you speak into the microphone when you're introducing yourself or later on when we're asking questions. So we'll start over here with Carl.
Carl Morera, PMA.
Neil Lesher, PA Chamber.
Joy Johnson, PMA.
Alex Halper, PA Chamber.
Alan Cooks, PA Chamber. Amy Britton, PA Chamber.
Dave Patty, Customers Bank.
Mary Beth Swearty, Americans for Prosperity.
Amber Benson, Health Strategies.
Greg Moreland, NFIB.
Melissa Morgan, NFIB.
Logan Henry, PMA.
Steve Bloom, the Commonwealth Foundation.
Margaret Durkin, TechNet.
Lauren Barr, Bravo Group.
John Basil, Community Bankers.
Kevin Shivers, Community Bankers.
Peter Calcara, Pennsylvania Institute of CPAs.
John Anzer, PA Chamber.
All right, wonderful. So thanks to everybody here for being present, and welcome also to those joining us online or joining us via the Pennsylvania Cable Network. Our guest today is a great friend, and he has one of the best bios in the legislature, which is why I am going to read the whole thing. Representative Jesse Topper has been the voice of his neighbors in the 78th Legislative District in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives since he was elected in 2014. In 2024, his Republican colleagues elected him as the House Republican leader for the 2024-25 session. Since taking office, Topper has been a strong advocate for improved health care options for residents, particularly those in rural areas. In recent legislative sessions, he has worked toward better educational opportunities for Pennsylvania students. As the Republican chairman of the House Education Committee, he worked with all stakeholders to enact several education initiatives to improve the lives of Pennsylvania students at all levels of education while respecting taxpayers. Topper is a lifelong resident of Bedford County and has two sons. Throughout his life, he has been very active in his community, participating in 4-H and the Boy Scouts, where he earned the rank of Eagle Scout. He also coaches football at Bedford High School, where he was a three-sport athlete. A homeschooled graduate, Topper earned his bachelor's degree from Frostburg State University. He is also a graduate of Leadership Bedford County and the Harry Wendelstadt Umpire School. Topper has remained active in his community, including having served as first and second vice president of the Bedford County Chamber of Commerce, as well as Bedford Borough Council. He also enjoys playing piano and organ at local churches and serves as a PIAA official in basketball and baseball. Please welcome our friend, true Renaissance man, Representative Jesse Topper.
Thank you. I tell you what, umpire school really did prepare me for this life. I can honestly say. So that was my dream. I grew up big baseball fan, and I wanted to be a professional baseball umpire. And just to give you an idea, there were 300 of us in that class that graduated. Of those 300, 20 of us got jobs, and of those 20, only one of us is still in the game today. That's how difficult it is. His name's Dave Rackley. He actually worked the World Series 2 years ago, worked, I think, ALCS last year. So if you ever see David Rackley as an umpire, for you baseball fans, know he went to school with Jesse Topper. He hopefully still remembers who I am, because but he got to live the dream. Thank you very much for having me here, back in session again with the Senate this week. We had appropriations hearings for a while, and then we as the House were in session last week. A lot of the conversation has been centered around the budget. And one thing that I'd like to kind of highlight that I'm happy about, if you will, this is the first year in quite some time that I have heard a lot of conversation around future budgets in relation to this one. We can be very short-sighted in the Harrisburg bubble and even the DC bubble, because we're on that election year calendar, which is every 2 years, particularly for those of us in the House and the Senate, obviously half and half. So we have that immediately look at a budget. What does this do this year? Do we have money? We've all been a part of those years in a budget where we look and say, man, this is going to be a tough year, or, oh, this is going to be a fine year. This is one of those years where we realize that there is money this year to probably have whatever kind of budget we'd want to enact. But everybody has now looked to the future to say, if we do that, we're putting ourselves in a very poor position next year, the year after, and particularly 3 and 4 years down the road. And that's encouraging to me. I feel like if we would have done that on a lot of issues, particularly budgetary issues in the past, we would probably not be in the situation that we are currently. So I'm glad that conversation is happening. How that will play out over the next few months, I've been very clear about what our caucus wants to see, and that is improved opportunities for private sector growth, driving the economic engine that we will need regardless of the kind of numbers we put on paper. Because if you take the governor's proposed budget, and let's just say, we say, all right, that's way too much. But even if you took half of that increase, that's still not sustainable in 3 to 4 years. Even if you level funded our current budget and look out 3 to 5 years, it's not sustainable. Well, so how do you answer that? There's 3 ways. 1, massive tax increases. 2, massive spending cuts. Or 3, we get the economy to a point where it sustains budgets from a state level because our private sector is growing, like what you see in states around the country that have implemented pro-economic growth policies. When I say around the country, I know everybody wants, oh, Florida, South Carolina. Look at Ohio. Look at West Virginia. I found it ironic that the governor, when he was talking about minimum wage, highlighted West Virginia. And I'm like, look, if you want public policy that West Virginia has, let's go. I mean, we have power plants being built there in under 18 months because their state government is actually shepherding a permitting process from shovels in the ground to completion and encouraging it to happen quickly. And it is. And so they're building, gas-generated power plants in West Virginia. They're building them in Ohio. We haven't built one since Governor Wolf put us into Reggie because we have this carbon tax hanging over our energy industry, which is one of the areas that we could really ignite the growth in Pennsylvania across the board. We've seen it happen before, and we could have it happen again. So if we want the regulatory environment that they have in West Virginia and Ohio, well, then that leads to other options. But until we have that, we certainly cannot continue to put more on a private sector that we've just not seen enough growth from. And when the governor made his pitch about bringing bureaucrats that were being let go in D.C. and hiring them at the state level, I'm sure everybody saw my response, which is we have a lot of open jobs in Pennsylvania. And they're in the private sector. So if you want a job in Pennsylvania, we've got one for you, But the idea that we're going to add to our own bureaucracy when we're looking at unsustainable budgets into the future, I don't believe that's where the growth must take place. If the growth continues at the government level, then you will not see the kind of growth that we need in the private sector. And that's what it comes down to. So we can talk numbers about the budget all we want. I've said to my colleagues in the Senate, I've said to the administration, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, is we're looking for policy changes. Because whatever numbers you put on that page, again, even if we flat funded it all this year, if we don't adopt pro-growth policies here in Pennsylvania, it is unsustainable moving forward. So that's where I'm at, if they're willing to deal on those issues. Look, right now we're at 101, 101. Here in a couple weeks there will be a 102, 101. It's a very slim majority in the House. I know the Senate is definitely on the same page as we are as of right now, which is they understand the need for economic growth, particularly in the energy sector. So we'll find out. And what I'll say is the governor has also talked about many of these things. Talks about growth in the energy sector. He talks about opportunities for educational choice throughout Pennsylvania. Talks about reforming our tax structure and making this a place, we're going to be as competitive as hell with Ohio. But at some point, the actions in terms of policy have to match the words being spoken. And if they continue to not, then we will continue to have trouble sustaining any kind of a budget, increase or no. So that's where we're at this point. I'll open it up to some questions.
All right, well, I'm going to use the prerogative of the chair to ask a couple of questions, get things warmed up. Luke will take his turn, and then we'll open it up to the group. And Leader Topper, it's great to hear you with an eye to the future, that you're looking downrange at the trends that we're facing, because Pennsylvania, year after year, decade after decade, under governors and legislatures of both parties, that our economic growth has only been a fraction of the national average. And that underperformance over time is what has left Pennsylvania behind. And, that's why we keep losing representation in Congress, that the seats, move away to states that have faster population growth, and that's a result of stronger economic growth. And, that there's and again, I don't want to be a scold about this. I know that everybody's heard me say this, but it's the most important fact of Pennsylvania budgeting, which is we have a structural deficit, which means that mandatory spending is increasing faster than the growth in revenue from just the natural growth of our state economy. And so, as we put the pedal to the metal on spending, it just hastens forward in time the catastrophe that we're going to be facing. And Dave Patty is here. I think are we the only ones who would remember the 1991 tax increase?
Oh, Dave, I'm
All right. We got a couple of graybeards here who would remember that.
$3.5 billion.
Yes, that Pennsylvania had $1 billion shortfall and then had a $3 billion tax increase. But Pennsylvania's PIT was 2.1, and then it went to 2.8, and then it's gone higher since then. And it's
CNI went to 11.99%.
Yes, and that condemned Pennsylvania to 2 generations of economic underperformance. So, again, I know that this is more of an editorial comment than a question, but just thank you for recognizing that foundational fact of budgeting. And I guess the question that comes from that is, how do we talk the big spenders down off the ledge?
Well, the way we talk to them is that if you want to keep being big spenders, then we need growth in Pennsylvania. Look, at the end of the day, there is an element of spending that has been in both parties. People want to help their constituents. And so sometimes we get in that battle over, well, how much? And that's why I think this conversation of economic growth is so important, because it really doesn't matter how much. It's no longer a win to say, well, you wanted to increase this program 6%, or you wanted to start a new program that spent $60 million. And so our win is if we get it down to 3%, or if you only spend $40 million. Doesn't work, because again, it's not sustainable. So kind of the old way of negotiating, well, you want to start here, we'll start here, and we'll end up here on spending, that only works if your private sector is strong. And right now, the monopoly money from DC is gone. Like, that's really what we have seen, and some of us have been, sounding the siren call on that since COVID, is a lot of these budgets, both locally and at the state level, from a governmental perspective, are being propped up with money that is going away. That COVID stimulus money that we are now seeing the end of. So we've been talking about it. We've been saying, look, and I was somebody who thought that anything that we got from COVID dollars needed to go into whatever would not be recurring revenue that would be needed to replace in the budget. So you want to do a school infrastructure program, now's the time to do it. You want to do some transportation stuff, now's the time to do it. Shovel-ready projects, get them built, because that money, when it's gone, it's gone. But, I was not successful in a lot of that because you want to support the programs that you have. But at the end of the day, it has to come. That's why the focus has to be: are we going to grow? And are we going to grow in the ways that we're seeing in states surrounding us? We can look at the states that are not. My district borders Maryland. They're having a tough time right now, and actually that puts more strain on us because, of course, with the PJM, we're all in that energy space together. So sometimes policies in Maryland and New Jersey and New York do affect our consumers, and I think that's what it's important to come back to. What happens when we see the economy go south? those folks here in this room and that you represent, they make cuts, right? They restructure, they move out, they do whatever they can to try and still provide the services but at a reduced cost. But at the end of the day, the working middle class Pennsylvanians are the ones who are paying for that. They are paying higher energy bills, and we're going to see that. We're going to see the results of anti-energy policies in these higher electric generation bills or power bills or electric bills that our folks are going to pay. They see it when the price of eggs is what it has been, and the price of groceries. That's where they see it. And to them, they're saying, well, what can be done about it? Well, we need more opportunities in the free market, and that takes time. And that's the other reason why this particular year is so critical. I think we would be okay with this year's budget, which is why we need to get the policies in place now, because if we wait to start getting shovels in the ground for energy generation in 2 years, it's too late then. If we continue to have our constituents not be able to do what they need in terms of at the grocery store, well, then they're going to be slower to purchase the things that they don't need. And we know what that trickle-down effect becomes throughout the whole economy. So that's why I think this year, even though those who have been around a while, you look at the numbers on the paper in terms of what we have in surplus and a rainy day fund, and still some of those COVID dollars hanging out there. And you'd say, well, why is this year a tough budget year? Because the cliff is coming so quickly. And if we don't start addressing it from a pro-growth policy now, well, then we're going to miss it. We're going to be, it's never good to govern during a time of crisis. Bad decisions are usually made when you have to make some kind of a decision. I would rather do it now. So again, that's why we're really putting the emphasis on trying to get something done this year.
And I guess the one follow-up question would be, what do you envision for maximizing Pennsylvania's energy opportunity to drive that growth?
Number one thing is we have to get rid of the carbon tax initiative through RGGI, and not just RGGI. We're not replacing it with anything, right? The idea that, well, we'll come up with our own Pennsylvania form of RGGI. That has brought such instability in the market that I think that's why we're not seeing the generation. And then it comes down to permitting and regulation. Look, tax structure is absolutely something, and we've been working on that, bringing down the CNI and other tax structures that I still would like to see. We know NFIB knows I'm still, beating the drum on the accelerated sales tax and that elimination. And there are certainly things we could do from a tax perspective, but for the most part, if you talk to business owners around the Commonwealth, it's permitting. You have other states that are willing to shepherd permits through, and then you have this state where by the time they see a return on their investment, it's going to be too late compared to where they can go to other states. So we have to get the permitting. Talked about that on the House floor the other day on an amendment to a solar bill, some of the things they've done over in the Senate, trying to reform organizations from structures that prohibit growth to actually saying, no, we're going to help. We're going to be a clearinghouse for permitting and regulation so that we can guide you through the process a lot quicker. Those would be the two things that I would think would set certainly our energy industry ablaze again.
All right, thank you. Luke, over to you.
Thanks, Dave, and thank you, Leader, for your comments. So many of your comments echo what we hear from our members every single day about how to get this economy moving again. And the regulatory burdens that Pennsylvania businesses face are significantly more than our neighboring states, as you indicated. One of the things that I think in your agenda and pushing for, that so much of what we agree with and would move our economy forward, some of the challenges in a 101, 102 environment, keeping even the 101 or 102 Republicans on the same page from advancing potentially challenging pieces of legislation. Last session, private rights of action seemed to be added or tried to be added on every single bill. We had different restrictions and other barriers to growth added on almost every single bill. More regulatory burdens almost added to every single bill. Different areas like nursing ratios and others. Some of them passed with some Republican support. How can you as leader keep 101 together on some of those really bad provisions for moving forward? Because if your vision was in place, I think the economy would be in a much better place in Pennsylvania. Some of the challenges we have is when bills come out of the House and they're 115, 120, and north in votes, it makes it more difficult for the Senate that is trying to hold firm on some of these issues to come back and say, we can't let this one through. Responsible contractor bills and others that I think are real challenges. And I think from a coalition standpoint, just saying that's a really bad idea, even if it goes through 102, 101, that changes the dynamic. So
Yeah, and I
look to you for your thoughts on that.
I think whether it's 102, 105, 106, even 110, that's not what causes the Senate heartburn, right? It's when they see, 140, 150 that starts to cause the Senate to think, okay, well, this does seem to have a lot of widespread support. So I wouldn't get too caught up in that, to be honest with you. There are decisions that we have to make on a daily basis in the minority in an effort to get to the majority. And that's just the reality of where we are. I think that one of the reasons why our energy message has been so on point thus far is because I've got 101 for that issue. I mean, we see that increased desire for some of these economic opportunities, particularly when it comes to generation builds, as well as the idea of what we can do to lower costs. That's something that plays in every part of the state, whether it's the southeast, the northeast, southwest, center part of the state. These are, that it's incumbent upon me when we're driving a message to pick messaging that 101 can get behind, and I believe we've been able to do that. That being said, we are not the majority party, which means they get to drive some messaging as well, and some of that becomes very political. And so, wise as it says in the Bible, trying to be wise as serpents and how we navigate that is part of my role. But I think you'll see that when we come out and are unified with the Senate on something, that's really what it means, is that this is what we believe we can drive with our caucuses in total in terms of an agenda that'll bring economic growth to Pennsylvania.
Just a comment before we open it up. Really want to thank you for acknowledging that taking any of these issues, it's not just the money that's going to solve the problem. And in many cases, if we continue to put money in terms of these problems, they're not going to get fixed. You look at all sorts. Child care is a major workforce barrier, but if we do not fix the systemic challenges around it in terms of liability reform, moving some regulations and others, we're going to be in the same crisis in 1-2 years, regardless of the money investment. So I know we've talked about that, appreciate your comprehensive approach to that, and look forward to working with you on that. With that, Dave, open it up.
Outstanding. Thanks very much, Luke. And we'll open things up for questions.
And I will ask my CEO here to elaborate on this question here a bit more. And Mr. Leader, thank you for being here. But again, obviously I'm old when it was brought up about the 1991 tax increase that occurred and was very involved in that. But what do you think your caucus can do, and are you interested in addressing lawsuit abuse reform? Because there are so many entities and business interests around this table today, and this issue has been around for decades with lawsuit abuse reform. So, Mr. Leader, I just ask you if you're willing to think your caucus would address it, even though the majority may not want to, and refer back to our CEO, Rebecca, here for even more details on the issue. But it's affecting so many entities around this table. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, those who have followed my career, which I don't know why you would necessarily, but if you have, you know where I stand.
Some bad calls and some playoff baseball games. But yeah.
I think tort reform is right below regulatory and permitting reform that could see Pennsylvania take off. Now, that does not build the kind of coalition that permitting and regulatory reform build, because of obviously our some other interest groups that are not necessarily around the table at the moment. So what I'll say is, one of the tricky parts there is that's one of those issues. Now, energy and issues with labor can split their caucus sometimes. Very difficult to split the other side of the aisle on a trial bar issue. But I will say this is one of those efforts where being in the majority, and I've been here under Speaker or Leader, then Speaker Turzai and Speaker Smith, where we were able to move some pretty significant. Steve knows he was there during that time. We were able to move some pretty significant tort reform. So there's no doubt that if we would hold the majority, we would be able to make, whether it's venue selection, all issues that are out there that are really hurting Pennsylvania's private sector. I do believe we would be able to get a good push on that. That will be something that will be very difficult from a minority position to do. The other side is in fairly lockstep on that issue. Now, that being said, and I'm going to, I've been told often that, oh, you don't tell people just what they want to hear. You tell them the way it is. And that's what everybody says they want to see in an elected official until sometimes they see it. And then they're like, you know what? I like the other way better. There have been times also where you can hold people's feet to the fire on the other side of the aisle as well. So yes, it can be easy to point at the elected officials in our caucus and say, well, you used the Senate as a backstop. More of you should have voted no. Well, I see a lot of support from the other side of the aisle from people who tell you guys, well, the Senate will be a backstop, but I have to vote yes. So all I'm saying is that also goes both ways.
One thing to just add there to Brian's point, there are, I think we see opportunities in these comprehensive approaches for targeted liability reform, childcare, transportation, others that can really move the needle. It is not what everyone around this table wants, I would say, but it can make a major difference in being more economically healthy and clearing some barriers that have been real blocks for advancement on some of those big issues. So as it comes up in a weird environment, in a 102, 101 closed Senate, might be an opportunity in some smaller areas for reform there.
And also a very much, it's one thing to be united on a vote where that's all you're voting on. It's another thing when it's part of an overall package, whether it be in the administrative or the budget or part of an agreement that gets the budget across the line, which is why we really have to work on the policy piece with the Senate, with our friends in the Senate, to ensure that, again, some of that you might not just be voting on the one issue. That might be encapsulated in an agreement. And that's where, when you have divided government, the place where you can really see these things come together is in June or whenever the budget may be passed, right? It's in that time, because now all of a sudden it's not, I mean, look, we've all made those votes. We've all made those votes where like, I don't love that part of this agreement, but these three things are really going to move the ball forward, and that's part of an agreement. So when you have divided government, that's a chance that we definitely have to work with that would not be the same in, say, our states around us like New York or New Jersey or Maryland that don't have to make that call.
Greg.
Thank you, Mr. Leader, and good to see you again. House Bill 200 came out of committee on a party line vote this past week. Would provide for 20 weeks of paid leave. I know I've emailed the caucus previously on this issue and let our feelings be known on it. It would equate to about a $4.3 billion tax increase, half on PA businesses, half on PA workers. This system would be much like the UC system is structured in that it would need to be staffed. It would need to be stood up. In the committee meeting, there was a lot of discussion about how this is a self-sustaining fund and it wouldn't cost the state anything to administer it. But yet Chairman Grove mentioned that it would cost about $200 million for the Commonwealth to stand it up, and then they would need to employ over 300 employees to maintain that system. Those employees would need to be paid, benefits would need to be given. It does cost the state quite a bit of money. It will cost PA businesses quite a bit of money. Has the caucus taken a look at legislation like Kristen Marcel has, where it kind of flips the whole notion on its head, rather than a cattle prod of forcing businesses, mandating fines, penalties, fees for non-compliance issues, compliance burden issues? Have they taken a look at rather the carrot and stick model versus the cattle product folks in, right? Kristen Marcel has a tax credit bill, and while we don't necessarily support tax credits all the time, I think it's a great proposal and a great argument to be had. You can encourage businesses to do what the state wants them to do and give them a reward for doing it, or you can force them into a model that may end up putting them out of business. Just wanted to get your perspective on that type of massive legislation that has a huge price tag.
Yeah, I agree with something that Luke said earlier, which is there are other ways to get at this problem. There are other ways to get at a workforce issue, and some of that workforce issue is some of the people that we need in the workforce have a very difficult time at various stages with childcare. And so, one of the things that I've tried to do back home when we've had these discussions is talk to the businesses. You know, when I look at like Sheetz Distribution Center that are literally they're entering into because it's good for them. And this is what I'm trying to stress in our caucus. At the end of the day, businesses want good employees, and they want those good employees to be happy, and they want them to be successful because that's what makes them successful. So I'm always much more interested in incentivizing that behavior as opposed to mandating it. And I think that would be another situation where you would see in the majority, look, is it supported by the majority of our caucus, that particular House? But no. And I think that you would see a majority party be able to work on that issue from a different level. And we are, even in the minority party, working to ensure that the workforce is adequate when it comes to young people who are having kids. My boys are 18 and 16 now. One's getting ready to go to college in the fall, and the other one's a sophomore in high school. I recognize that I'm in a very different spot than some of my colleagues who are trying to balance what they're trying to balance, and some of our staff. And that was conversations that we had. We don't have anything mandated when it comes to parental leave. We did improve our parental leave policy as a caucus. Why? Because I want more of those employees. And so that's always my default position is let the market determine it. Because if you're a business that maybe isn't offering those benefits and the business down the street is, well, that's a competitive advantage or disadvantage based on the market. And that's the way it should work. In any way that we can, that's the way it should work.
Questions to the leader? Steve.
Thanks, David. And Jesse, thanks for being here. And yeah, I have been following your career.
Especially since we sat near each other on the House floor.
But and part of it is it was mentioned in your bio that you were homeschooled as a child, and I know you've paid a lot of attention over the years to school reform and public education policy and so forth. And one of the reasons I've followed you all this time is because of the amount of work you put into that. I don't think this was in your bio, but you also served as House Republican Education Chair, and I
lost track about halfway through what he was saying.
You always approach things with a level of detail that a lot of the members don't, and that's what's appreciated. You dig in, you get to understand the different sides around the issues. So one of the issues that's perennially considered this time of year as we head into budget is public school reform, education reform. I wonder if you could kind of just give a rundown of where things stand with that and kind of from being at the table where the negotiation points are.
Yeah. Again, sometimes it's getting people to recognize where we're at. I think when Steve and I both started in the legislature, it was the idea from one side that everything that the public schools did were terrific, and there was no need to do anything other than increase salaries for staff members and keep the apparatus of education going. COVID changed all of that. COVID fundamentally changed all of it. We looked at how education was delivered as a system. We looked at which students were most at risk with a system that was problematic in some ways. I mean, we're talking about a system that was started and looks very much like it did in the industrial age, where we're just not making the dynamic changes nor allowing the system to move dynamically. People ask me all the time about what's going on in the federal government about taking out the Department of Education. So both sides have been asking for money without strings attached for how many years? right? Like if the federal, all these regulations and these standardized testing models, and we're teaching to tests and all this stuff coming down from No Child Left Behind and all that. And now we have an administration that's saying, that's gone. We'll give you the money and you figure out how to spend it. Well, my goodness, how are we not celebrating that universally? The system is in need and has been in need of reform. And I've said this and I'll continue to say it. Every family should have access, no matter where they're from, to a high quality education. That could be, so that means we need each one of their choices to be high quality. We need their traditional K through 12 model public school to be high quality, because in areas like mine, in Bedford and Fulton County, I don't have one Catholic school. I do not have, after this year, one brick and mortar charter school. So the choices in 2 counties in a poor rural Appalachian district are the public school or cyber school / homeschooling. That's the choice. So I need both those choices to be quality. I can't just say, yes, there are absolutely school choice through vouchers should be a part of our portfolio, but that doesn't help a lot of our kids if they don't have a school that they can attend that's private with those dollars. So we need every choice to be high quality. And if there are choices that are not high quality, then those kids need the opportunity to go somewhere else. And so anything that we do that improves the quality of education to outcomes, and that allows that if that quality isn't there, students to find another way, those are the policies I will support, and I will work with whomever wants to get that done. And I think I've shown that throughout my career. And then the second part of that is some of the changes we were able to make over the past couple terms in higher education has been real, and we're starting to see some good results from that. We need to continue on that, because that's really what is determining our workforce. And when I say, post-secondary education doesn't just mean a 4-year university, which turns into a 7-year degree and changing majors 3 times and
the Blue-Tarski plan.
Coming out with a degree in Roman pottery, right? We have to make sure that our post-secondary education is aligning with what we need in Pennsylvania for Pennsylvania students and for students that are coming here. How do we get them to stay here?
Other questions? Amber.
Mr. Leader, thank you for being here. Appreciate your vision for making Pennsylvania a pro-growth, pro-innovation economy, commonwealth. Pennsylvanians have obviously given us divided government, and both sides of the aisle do talk about many of the same things that you talk about, obviously different approaches to get there. From our vibrant energy economy, we have a great tech sector, really strong life science and biotechnology industry in Pennsylvania. So we have a lot of opportunities to have, as you said, the policy in place that will bring more of those private sector jobs and growth to Pennsylvania. Just from a really practical standpoint, what opportunity do you believe you have as leader of your humble minority, because it is humble, as the leader on the other side of the aisle likes to talk
his
about
side
is
is humble.
The humble majority. What opportunity do you have to really come to the table with your vision for those policy changes that need to take place in Pennsylvania?
Well, we do it through messaging, right? We make it clear what our message is and what our stance needs to be. The other way we do it is through this budget process. There's not any scenario that I see that the majority party can pass a budget with 102 to 105 that the Senate Republicans will be on board with. I also don't see a scenario where the Senate Republicans have a budget that they're all happy with that he can get 102 Democrats for. So at some point, something's got to give. At some point, there is the ability to say, we are going to be part of this discussion by the sheer math that's out there. And I believe we're also going to be part of this discussion based on how we work with the other chamber. Look, there's no secret in Harrisburg that the House and the Senate have not always, even when the parties were aligned, it's sometimes feel like that's where the real battle is. I've made it very clear that that is not how I want to be a leader of this caucus. I view them as partners in this. I do not view them as adversaries. I don't know of another way to do it. They are in the majority. We are in a very close minority. I'm doing everything I can to ensure that we are working as a Republican legislature, not on our islands, so that we can be, more powerful together. I go back to when Governor Wolf proposed his first budget, which was going to be, one of the most massive tax increase, the most massive tax increase in the history of the Commonwealth. Marcellus shale tax was on the table, and I remember how powerful it was as a new legislator, watching Joe Scarnati and Mike Turzai stand up at the same podium saying, "This is dead on arrival." The Republicans in the legislature say this is dead on arrival. Now, I don't think that it doesn't really matter what maybe was seen behind the scenes all the time, but from a front perspective, that ended that. That, in my opinion, that ended the Wolf plan because the legislature was able to stand together. We need to be able to do that again, and we need to be able to do that effectively. There's going to be disagreements. There's going to be areas of conflict. This is, Harrisburg and politics, and that's what's going to happen. Government is inherently adversarial. That's how the system was set up. But I believe for the most part, we need to be working for common ground with our Senate brethren as much as we can.
Questions? Carl.
You talked about business tax reform, you talked about some trade-offs. One trade-off that has always been attached to business tax reform has been combined reporting. Governor Shapiro included that in his budget proposal. There was a large amount of revenue associated with it. However, seeing that Pennsylvania already has serious add-back provisions, windfall is already being realized, and there will be very little, if anything, negative windfall if combined reporting went through. Wondering what the caucus is on that issue.
Well, as you've said, combined reporting has been proposed in every gubernatorial budget in the past, I don't know how many years, but certainly in recent memory, and it has not happened, which tells you where that is on the priority list for the Republican legislature. There's a lot of things that are beyond the trading table, but that has been, and it has not been adopted because it has been staunchly opposed on our side of the aisle, and for good reason. I tend to try not to look at things in a vacuum. Like, you would have to see what the whole trade is. It's easy to say we're against this, we're against that. It depends what we're trading. But so far in my time, there's never been a trade offered for combined reporting that has even come close to countering the damage that would do to our economy here in Pennsylvania. Not even close.
Dave.
If I can follow up on that, so are you getting anything either out of the budget hearing or the chatter in the front office and the budget secretary of his desire for those things in those trade-offs? For instance, the combined reporting and the bank shares tax, that part of the proposal.
It's a little early. It's a little early day for that. I mean, I right now he wants everything that he asked for. And that's where we're at as we sit here in March. But when it comes down to what's going to be his markers in the sand, I don't know. No signals yet. Not yet. I mean, he proposed two forms of revenue that aren't even legal in the Commonwealth yet. So, I think there's a lot that has to go in until we get there.
Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. This might be a sort of a building off of Amber's question, but you were tested early on as in your time as leader, negotiating a rules package, a speaker vote with an exact tie on the House floor. I think a lot of us watching that from the outside saw reasons for optimism with how that process played out. Wondering if you can either share any insight now that we're a couple months into it, how that process evolved, and whether any optimism that you projected based on how that played out, if that's coming to fruition, if you sort of see that continuing.
Not a lot of sleep those nights, I can tell you that. That was difficult. It was a difficult situation that we were dealt with a gentleman who went on to pass away, and that's very difficult. This is what I felt at the time. neither side has an improved position, but certainly not our side had an improved position with not having this institution be able to function because a member had a heart attack. That being said, I had been asking, I thought the rules last session were not reflective of a 102, 101 majority. They were reflective of something that we would have passed when we were at 121. Almost silencing the debate and the ability to offer amendments, and the committee structure, the committee splits were just simply not what I would consider reflective of a divided House. And so I had made, long before that had happened, I had made my thoughts of that known, and it was kind of like, thank you for your consideration. Well, all of a sudden it went from, you know what, maybe we do need to have a conversation about that. So some of the circumstances dictated how we were able to get into that spot. I think what we have seen so far has been positive. There have been Republican amendments that have been adopted. There have been Republican bills come over from the Senate that have been adopted. There's a special election tomorrow that will change the dynamic, but I believe that the number one thing we had to show Pennsylvania is that we can function at 101, 101. We can function, and we can get this institution up. And keep in mind what would have happened had we not. Would there have been appropriations hearings? Would there have been any committees organized? Or would we be going into a budget with no work being done until this point? And at the end of the day, that was going to be a plague on all of our houses. And I wasn't about to let that happen. And I understand that not everybody probably agreed with every bit of that decision. But that's why I'm in the position I'm in, is you have to sometimes make those decisions. And I think as I reflect back on it and see where we are now, I believe we are in a better place as an institution and as a House Republican caucus because of it.
Kevin.
Wanted to touch on something. Luke actually raised the issue regarding data privacy and some litigation. And I think it's, we've watched legislation policy in Pennsylvania kind of evolve in the last session. It almost was like a 20th century view, where we're going to punish people if there's a breach, rather than to think, wow, how do we address this issue holistically? And I know from our sector, the community banking industry, and I know even larger banks, we are seeing an onslaught of fraud, and the bad guys are coming at this issue from every angle. They're getting into folks' email, and they're using AI to capture individuals' voices and then sending out emails to people, encouraging them to, click on links. You have fraud, that's taking place, within businesses and institutions. And I guess my point would be to encourage the legislature to think holistically about this issue. Fraud in the data space is not necessarily the result of one party that's not doing anything. I think we need to take a holistic view, and how can we partner between law enforcement, financial institutions, industry to be able to minimize or to try and protect that data. An example, you have a member of your caucus, Joe Hogan, last year, who really took on a significant issue regarding fraud exchanges, exploitation of senior citizens. And so there was legislation that Joe introduced last year that would allow a bank to be able to raise a hand and temporarily halt a transaction if they suspected that there was some type of fraud involved with that. Unfortunately, I think that old style view kind of won the day, and that legislation, turned into a horrific piece of legislation that ultimately would have prevented seniors access to their own money. So we want to take up the issue again this year. We're working right now in the Senate. Obviously, we've been in close contact with Representative Hogan, but a thought of creating a partnership between government, law enforcement, the private sector to stem this problem, because it's not just the old actors that we used to see, the kid in his basement or somebody in a mill somewhere in PA, warehouse. These are perpetrators that are organized by government, foreign actors that are creating these frauds. And I think it's all of us that need to work together on those solutions.
Look, it's also a national security issue, and so I think it's one of those issues that state and federal governments need to work on together, and trying to keep up with that. One of the best things that I think we can do is make sure our laws at both the federal and state level allow industry to keep up with the problem. And sometimes we don't, right? Sometimes these laws are very written in such a way that address today, but they don't know what the threats are going to be like in 5 years. So however we can do that, while also balancing and make sure the rights of our citizens are not infringed upon, because I also think people know there's an inherent amount of risk that is out there to live the life that we want to live with the technology that we want to use. We love the idea of being able to click on a button and having money go one way or the other, and I don't have to write my checks and I don't have to do all this. There's risk with that. And so that's one of the things that I look at is, are we putting our industry in the sectors that like your own, in an ability to stay dynamic as the bad actors are certainly dynamic, or are we putting ourselves in a kind of painting ourselves into a corner? Those are the things that I look at when I consider, and when I say I look at, I mean I rely on other people to help, because that is certainly outside of my wheelhouse of expertise in terms of how to stop cybercrime.
All right, we've got just a few minutes remaining. Do we have a couple last questions, Mary Beth?
Sure, I'd like to ask you about the RAINS Act. We're seeing a lot of states do their own versions of RAINS and having success with that. And I know last year we had good bills from Don Kiefer, Christopher Till, John DeSanto. And what this would do when we're talking about a regulatory environment is allow things like more transparency or automatic review of significant regulations by the legislation, or taking a certain dollar amount of an impact of regulation and having that need to be approved by the legislature, and taking power away from these unelected agencies and putting it back to the people that actually represent us. Would love to see some action on that. Are you hearing anything this session from the House or the Senate?
Just the concept, the concepts is there was a bill, actually we offered an amendment. I think the Senate has already voted on it. There was a kind of a reformation of a particular regulatory board when it came to energy that would allow the legislature more input on approval of permits. There was a member on the other side of the aisle that said, "Do you really want to be the guy in charge of signing off on permits?" I said, "Absolutely." So, he's, I think it's like, "Do you really want Gene Yaw signing off on permits?" I said, "Absolutely." So, look, I think that's a fundamental difference between our side and the other side. But yes, anything that we can do, because yes, again, taxation is one thing, but Pennsylvania is still very uniquely situated when it comes to transportation. We are the Keystone State for a reason. And I think businesses are looking for a reason to be here, and it's not the weather, right? They're looking for a reason to be here. We don't have to be South Carolina and Florida, because we are situated in a spot with our infrastructure that is, whether it be the ports, we're the Keystone State for a reason. We just have to not make it prohibitive to do business here.
Amen.
And that's where I think if we can get more control over the regulatory process, then we would have that, because the legislature is incentivized to get things done for the private sector, because they're the ones who put us back in office. Bureaucrats are not necessarily incentivized to do that, because they're there regardless. So I'm all for whatever we can do to move the process of bringing more regulation into our world as opposed to outside the world of the bureaucrats.
All right. Just time for one or two more questions for the leader. All right. Well,
I'll tell a funny PIAA story to end, since it was brought up about me officiating. Luke made a passing comment about working games in your own area just a little while ago. I heard it, and that actually did happen. I was working a district semifinal basketball game where both teams were teams from my district. Very dangerous spot to be in. And as I was the lead official in a three-man crew in basketball, there was a gentleman down in the corner that yelled out after one of my calls, "That's it, Topper, I'm not voting for you anymore." To which I responded by taking the whistle out of my mouth and say, "Great, I'll have more time to officiate basketball next year." On my way back down the floor, he goes, "I changed my mind, I'm voting for you every time." So it got a pretty good laugh from the athletic director and the fans that were around that gentleman, but I thought it was a decent comeback. So
outstanding. Luke,
thank you so much for
a
having
final thought from you.
No, just thank you very much for all of your leadership and look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader Topper. We appreciate you. And thanks again for being with us. So, Carl, we're back next month.
April 28th, guest still to be determined, but same time and location as always.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to seeing everybody then. Thanks so much for being here. Have a great day.